What's going on, guys? Today we're going to find out how cursed Canadian NHL teams are by sending through franchise mode and removing one team every season, probably whichever team wins the Stanley Cup. And we're going to see how many teams need to be in the league for a Canadian team to finally win a Stanley Cup. Last time it happened was actually before I was born. I'm pretty old now. 1993, the Montreal Canadiens. 30 years ago, or about to be 30 years ago. Obviously, if the Leafs, Oilers, or Jets win it this season, the streak will end at 29. But it's looking like it's going to be 30 years without a Canadian Stanley Cup champion. I'm going to get started here, guys. Probably just going to use the Chicago Blackhawks during this, just because they're a team that's not really expected to compete. So if I'm just kind of simming through with them, not doing any moves, it should affect the sim the least. As you can see there, they are the lowest overall team. And speaking of overalls, I should point out the Montreal Canadiens are the lowest rated Canadian team there, 85 overall, which isn't even that bad. You then have Ottawa 88, Toronto 89, Winnipeg's a 90, Vancouver 88, Edmonton's 89, Calgary's a 90 as well. So like all the Canadian teams aside from Montreal are like contenders in game. So it could take literally one simulation or could take, 20. We're going to find out. Alright guys, this video is not going to be as short. As you can see, playoffs are now complete and the Avalanche are your Stanley Cup champions. Marlies did win the Calder, but we want a Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup, not the Calder Cup. The Ducks there actually win the first overall pick, which obviously they have the best chance to do in real life. I just want to see how far, the best Canadian team made it. The Vancouver Canucks of all teams made it to the Western Conference Final, losing to the Avalanche in 7. So they put up a fight. The next closest there was the Leafs, losing the Bruins in the second round. Alright. And so as you guys can see here, because the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup, I removed them from the league for the next simulation. So we'll see without the Stanley Cup winners there, do the Canucks, make the Stanley Cup final, maybe even win it. Alright guys, now in the second simulation, we have another Stanley Cup champ from the Central Division, the Nashville Predators there, winning the Stanley Cup. And I actually saw too who they beat in the Stanley Cup final. It wasn't the Vancouver Canucks, obviously. It was actually the Toronto Maple Leafs. They beat there in 6. Vancouver, though, they did take out in the conference final in 5 games. So, 2 games away there from this video being over, but unfortunately for the Maple Leafs fans, they lose to the Predators of all teams. Alright guys, so for the third simulation, we got rid of the Nashville Predators, had to move the Vegas Golden Knights to the Central Division, as it didn't let me have like 8 in the Pacific and 6 in the Central. Still though, 14 teams in the West, 16 in the East, gonna give, Western Conference teams a lot easier road to the Cup. Playoffs are now complete, and the Boston Bruins win the Stanley Cup. Surprised it took them this long, honestly, considering, how good they've been in real life. That's also our first Stanley Cup champ from the Eastern Conference, so I'll take a quick look at the playoff tree. I did see there were a bunch of Canadian teams in the West pretty far in the playoffs. So take a look here. Boston there beat Vegas in 5. You had Vancouver actually in the conference final. They lost to Vegas. It was the semifinals. You had Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Vegas in the West. So 3 of the 4 teams were Canadian. And then Vegas, of course, is the one that, represents the Western Conference. So how crazy is that? All right, guys. So for the fourth simulation, again, we got Vegas in the Central. And, of course, we removed Boston there from the Atlantic. And look at this, guys. At the end of the year, we got the Washington Capitals winning the Stanley Cup. Canadian teams can just not find a way to get it done. Accidentally took control of Detroit this time, if you're wondering why you're seeing Larkin there. So how close the Canadian team gets. They beat Dallas there in 7 in the Stanley Cup final. Toronto was the Eastern Conference final though, and they went to 7, so literally 1 game away from being back to, the Stanley Cup final there. I feel like Toronto's probably the best shot at getting this done. We'll see if they can make it happen in the next sim. And now for the 5th simulation, because we have 28 teams, we actually have an even 7 teams in each division. The only team that's moved again is the Vegas Golden Knights, so looks a lot cleaner now. Let's see how it goes. And now at the end of the 5th simulation, guys, you have the Carolina Hurricanes winning the Stanley Cup. And again, we actually had a Canadian team pretty close. It was a rematch of the 2006 Stanley Cup final. Well, that's kind of funny when you have less teams. Look at that. The list gets cut off. Columbus jumps from 8 to 1. I'm sure, Blue Jackets fans really hoping they can jump up in the draft this year as well. But as I mentioned, rematch of the 06 Stanley Cup final. The Canes actually beat the Oilers in 5 games. The Oilers were the only team there in the conference finals. So Carolina's getting removed now, and maybe the Canadian teams can finally win one. Now for the 6th simulation, guys, we're down to 27 teams. One thing that's kind of funny, honestly, is the fact that the division with the lowest amount of teams, the Metro, has no Canadian teams. So half these teams guaranteed a playoff spot. Unfortunately, none of them are Canadian. This is pretty funny, guys. At the end of the 6th simulation here, the Devils win the Stanley Cup. Canadian teams just cannot catch a break. Maybe the next one, 7th simulation, there's 7 Canadian teams. That'll be like their lucky number. St. Louis there, and gets Bedard. So we'll take a look at the playoff tree and see how far one of the Canadian teams did make it. Wow, none of them in the conference final, but you did have Calgary, Toronto, and that's it actually in the quarterfinals. Alright, so yeah, not the best sim for Canadian teams this time. Alright guys, we're starting the 7th simulation here. The one big change I made was actually moving Buffalo to the Metro Division, just because they only had 5 teams at this point, and the game wouldn't let me start otherwise. So I feel like that makes sense, keep the Florida teams, Canadian teams in the Atlantic. And now check this out, guys. At the end of the 7th year sim, the Minnesota Wild win the Stanley Cup. Canadian teams, I don't know. They honestly might be cursed. The thing is, though, I feel like before I've done this, they've won the Stanley Cup, like, in the first year sim before. I think we're just getting unlucky as well. Arizona there jumps from 10 to 1 to pick first overall and get Bedard. Now we'll take a look and see how close to the Canadian team get this time around. So far, I think the closest is like 7th game Stanley Cup final, or it might have been 6th game with the Leafs. Leafs were back in the Stanley Cup final. They actually got swept there by the Wild. Oilers as well were in the conference final. They got beat though in 6. So I mean, we're getting closer, it looks like. All right, guys, we're now down to 25 teams. One thing that's kind of funny, there's still not a single Stanley Cup champion from the Pacific Division. Obviously, you can see the 7 teams there, plus Vegas over in the Central. Maybe this sim will finally get one. Maybe even like the Oilers, another Canadian team, will get it done. All right, guys, so after the 8th simulation, the Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup. Just doesn't seem like, Canadian teams want to get it done. I'm not sure if we're going to be down to like 8 teams and still they're going to find a way to lose. Philly there winning Connor Bedard. So we will take a look. I mean, we've had, what, 2 or 3 times Canadian team's been in the Stanley Cup final. I feel like every single time but once there's been one of them in the conference final. And this time there's actually none of them in the conference final. Wow, that's pretty remarkable. None of them even made the semis. Actually, no, sorry, I just see Vancouver there losing to Seattle in 7. But yeah, these Canadian teams are slowing down, it seems. Now to start the 8th simulation, we're down to 24 teams. So we got 4 divisions, 6 teams in each. The Pacific Division is now just the 3 Canadian teams with a 3 Cali team, which means we move Seattle there to the Central. I think the Atlantic's the same with the Metro, apart from Buffalo being there now. So I don't know, maybe this is finally time Canadian teams can step up. And now check this out, guys. It took 9 simulations, but a Canadian team has finally won the Stanley Cup, and it was the Vancouver Canucks of all teams. Honestly, I would have told you for sure I thought it'd be either the Leafs or the Oilers getting it done, and I do think both teams made the playoffs and made, pretty deep runs. So in the West, you had every Canadian team, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Winnipeg. In the East, you only had Toronto and Ottawa, but still, almost every single Canadian team made the playoffs this year. But surprisingly, only the Canucks made the conference final, where they swept the Ducks before going on to actually beat the Islanders in 7 games. So good on the Vancouver Canucks, breaking the Canadian curse. I can't believe we had to go down to 24 teams for this to finally happen, but at least it did. It would have been so embarrassing if we had, 11 teams left. Canadian teams still hadn't won it. I will check the awards just in the final year. I mean, it's all Canadian so far. McDavid there, Art Ross, Matthews, Hart, Fox at the James Norris, though. Zegers, Lady Bang. Okay, I spoke too soon, apparently. JT Miller, Conn Smythe. Interesting. Markstrom, Vezina, though. Seth Jones, Will Masterton. Buffalo there against the Jack Adams. Kopitar, Selke. Matthews, Ted Lindsay. Tage Thompson, Maurice Richard. Good amount of Canadian representation there, but again, all we were looking for was the Canadian Stanley Cup winner. They finally get it done. Pretty crazy how long it took. Also, guys, I totally forgot, but I should probably show you what the Stanley Cup winning Vancouver Canucks look like. So, you gotta love this game sometimes. Apparently, EA thinks the Vancouver Canucks are simply 1 player away from being Stanley Cup champions, and that player is Andreas Johnsson, 80 overall, essentially a cap dump. And he's the guy that's going to push them over the edge. I don't understand. And in terms of the playoffs, Barzal was actually the best player there. 34 points in 24 games. Unfortunately for him, though, his team lost in the final. Now, looking at the Canucks, you can see P led the team in scoring. JT Miller, though, got that Conn Smythe just because he had a better plus-minus. You guys can see the rest of the players there. Hughes, pretty solid numbers for a D-man. Heronic, though, actually outproduced him. And then goaltending-wise, Demko here. Solid numbers, nothing crazy. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave that thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the sub button down below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.